Today in this video, we're going to be taking a look at Operation Floodgate and the route that I run in Pugs. Now, this is the last video in my series where I talk about routes that I run in Pugs. Of course, this is subjective. What you want to do for route is really up to you as a tank. Obviously, Pugs do expect some level of competency or some kind of structure, and more often than not, Pug tanks tend to all do the same thing because there is a route of least resistance. But I want to talk about this dungeon in particular, and what's exciting about this dungeon, or I guess I think is exciting, but I think some people dread, is this is the one dungeon with an extremely loose structure, because you can choose to go to the first boss first or the second boss first. There are various trash pulls throughout the dungeon, and based on which boss you go to might change like how you pull the dungeon. So this, I would say, is a little bit against the grain, against the norm. But the route that I end up running, I like to go to the first or the second boss first. So let's talk about what the pulls end up looking like. And I really want to talk about the mentality of checkpoints. And what I mean by that is, instead of worrying about, okay, I need to pull exactly these mobs in this order and this pull, I like to think of this dungeon more as checkpoints, and the most important checkpoint in this dungeon is when you're leaving from the Swampface area, so once you kill third boss, but I'll talk about that once we get there. Anyways, the first pull of the dungeon is always going to be fairly large. The reason for this is because you want to get less on cooldown, everyone has their offensive CDs, and the first pull is pretty relaxed. Well, kind of. So you're going to actually just be able to walk right through here. You don't need shroud or anything, you don't need any kind of like invisibility. The only thing you need to be careful of is there's this one undercrawler right here. He like pats up and, back and forth. If he happens to get roped into the first pull, it's not a big deal. He just applies poisons through lethargic poison, which slows their movement speed, so it can remove by snare removals, but it can also be dispelled by the healer if you have a healer who can dispel poisons. If not, it's really not that big of a deal. But your first pull is going to be fairly large. You're going to grab this pack. You're going to grab these contractors, the Shredinators, as well as these contractors. Now, I personally don't like grabbing these loader bots, specifically in situations where you're running with a lot of melee DPS. Now, if they happen to get pulled, which you're probably going to see in the footage that's on screen, if they get pulled, it's not a big deal. I was also playing in like a fairly range heavy comp, so at the end of the day, it's not the end of the world. The only thing you want to be careful for are these wind-up casts. The contractors do melee fairly hard, but they don't do anything in particular, so just making sure you have basic mitigation up. And then tanks, you have to be a little aware of the soldier's black blood wound. Honestly, this more comes down to your healer dispelling you than it does to you using mitigation, because it is just a ramping damage over time effect that stacks. And so, if you have things like diffuse magic or bubble, for example, like you can definitely remove it yourself. If you're a dwarf, you can remove it yourself. But I would say that generally you're relying on your healer. And obviously the last two big dangerous mobs in the pack are going to be the Shredinator, which you just want to obviously dodge the blades and dodge the flamethrower. Now the flamethrower is baited on the tank. So the tank wants to face it in a direction that's ideally static, but also away from your group and away from your range. Now it only has a 20-yard range on it, so it's really not that far. But getting clipped by this will pretty much evaporate someone. And then last but not least, you want to make sure you're kicking the surveyors on their surveying beam. Now, any kind of like weird sporadic damage throughout the pull is probably coming from these dynamite casts. If you notice that one is targeting you and you're low on health for some reason, just stun it, CC them. They're going to recast it, but they could recast it to another target, or it buys your healer some time to heal you up. So that's the first pull. First pull is pretty big. Now, this is where my route immediately deviates from probably what is normal. And I've asked some people in my guild this. Actually, I did a little survey where I ran a route with some of my guildies who just generally pug their weekly keys. And they said that what I do is not normal at all. So I apologize if this is against what you're normally used to seeing. But this is what I do next. So immediately following this pull, I like to jump down onto these 3 crabs. And I grab these 2 divers, and I run them over to this architect pack. So you only have 2 divers. Now, divers with architect is really scary. They cast this thing called Harpoon. This will grip a player to them, but it also deals heavy physical damage over 10 seconds. So ideally, you don't want this to go off. Now, you can slow walk them over. In the footage you're seeing, you're going to see me on a paladin who has access to a vendor shield. Death grips are also super useful for moving these mobs quickly, but just don't pull more than 2. But this is a pretty efficient pull, and you're obviously going to focus on the architect. The only thing that is new in this pull is the the crabs, the bombshell crabs, they blow up when they die, and they do a tank buster. The tank buster is not super lethal because it's fizz dam. Following this, I do like to pull then the next Architects pack. It is possible to skip this, but I just think it's like easier percent, especially in like a weekly key. This pack isn't, I would say, lethal. Like in high keys, it's definitely, it becomes to the point where like you want to avoid as many of these dynamites as you can. The nail gun from the Architect becomes obviously extremely problematic. And then during this pull at some point, generally I like to do it a little bit later, you want to grab the 2 bombshell crabs that are kind of just like hanging out right here. So what I did is I like threw an adventure shield at them, and they eventually walked up. The main reason that you're kind of getting these in later is mostly because the Architect is going to live a lot longer, mostly because he has a bigger health pool, and he gets a massive DR when he's up on his scaffolding. And so by pulling him in a little bit later, what ends up happening is that then you at least have a couple targets to hit, so DPS can continue feeling like they can send their cooldowns and bigger damaging abilities. Following this, I like to head up the stairs, and we're going to grab the Shredinator plus the Venture Co. Surveyor. Now this pack obviously is a little bit more dangerous because it has double Shredinator in it, but again, aim the frontals in a static direction. They are desynced, so they won't actually cast them at the same exact time generally. And then you obviously have the Surveyor you have to watch out for. Now once this Surveyor is low, I like to then chain into this next pack. Now this is a chain, keep that in mind. I'm going to put them all into one pull so you know though. In Pugs, I like to not have 2 Surveyors in at the same time, but when I'm doing it with like pre-mades, I generally will pull both. But what this does is it allows you to always have kind of like 5 target cleave, because these Shredinators are obviously extremely beefy. In a 10 level key, they have 409 million, and the Surveyors only have 200 million. So they have basically double the health. So if you focus the Surveyor and kill it, you can pull in the next one, and then everything should die at the same exact time. Easy peasy. Then we're going to actually pull the Demolition Duo. Now, following these first boss going down, or I guess the second boss in this case, we're going to then head back, and then we're going to do what is typically the second pull of the dungeon. We're going to now do this as the, I guess, technically 6th pull of the dungeon, if you're including bosses. We're going to first grab the Surveyor and these hyenas, and then once we get the kick on the surveying beam, we're able to walk this pack onto this Architect. Then, once this Architect, or once I guess all of these mobs go down and it's just the Architect left, you'll then chain onto the next pull. So it'll look, it'll basically be one big chain pull, but you'll do something like this. Then you'll grab the box once this pack is dead. So again, all these mobs we've seen before. The only thing we haven't seen yet are these hyenas. They don't really do much. Following this pretty standard pull, we're going to be grabbing this pack with the triple snipers and the demolitionist. We're going to be grabbing the soldiers and the inspectors. Now, the inspectors port behind people and randomly do a frontal. Soldiers are applying a debuff to the tank. The most important thing to look out for here is the snipers. They do this thing called trick shot, which can be interrupted, but it's essentially like a chain lightning to your group. And any one hit is going to take a lot of damage, and it's going to also bounce. So it's a lot of AoE damage that you just don't need to be taking here. This pull can be very lethal, or it can be very chill. Because if you get overlap with like trick shots and other like shoot mechanics from these snipers, you'll get one shot. But if you interrupt the trick shots, there's like almost no damage pretty much. And then if you can, as a tank, I like to watch this guy. This guy will do his RPG, and then after he casts it, he keeps trying to cast a reload. So what you have to do is you just keep stunning him over and over and over again, and this guy will be chill. So at this point, we're going into Big M.O.M.M.A now. I personally like to grab these 2 contractors onto boss just for a little bit bigger damage. Normally, at this point, Lust should be coming up. If you're on a good pace, Lust will have come up during this pull. If you're fast, it won't even be up yet for Big M.O.M.M.A, but if you're slow, it'll have come up like down here. So Big M.O.M.M.A with contractors isn't too scary. Again, these contractors are just doing a little bit more melee damage to the tank, but tanks are extremely they're very sturdy this season. Once Big M.O.M.M.A goes down, what we're going to do is we're going to do a nice like little cooldown recovery pull if the healer needs it, and we're going to be pulling these soldiers and hyenas at the bottom of the like little pack here. We don't want these snipers, and we're going to be attempting to grab these soldiers up here. Once that pack goes down, we will be finishing up with the Bloodwarper pack and grabbing these far contractors, putting us at 63.4%. So that is everything we've done up to this point. Once this pack goes down, you're going to be destroying your last weapon stockpile, and you can either take the like little goblin glider down, or you can just jump down. It's not a big deal. Just make sure you don't die to fall damage, because that would be very embarrassing. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to clear all of the disturbed kelp. Now, these packs are split up. They are technically 2 different pulls. So if you really want to, You can like split it up like this. I just recommend doing them all together. The big thing here is you want to stop their jettison kelps whenever there's more than one. So as soon as there's a second cast, use any form of CC, whether it's a knockback, an AoE stun, a disorient, whatever you can. And then of course kick them on their algae. You can also purge this, so it's not a big deal. Once that pet goes down, you can activate Swampface's like little RP, and then we can pull some divers. Now our goal is to be roughly 78%. Remember when we talked about checkpoints earlier? There's two things that you could do here. You could either pull all the divers together, or if you notice you're like around 75, you can also just pull a few crabs instead if you feel like that's better for your group, if you don't have the coordination. Now in this run, I was on a prop paladin, so I was able to kind of focus up a little bit more and throw Avenger Shield to interrupt the harpoon casts. If you can't obviously have that luxury, then simply just you can pull some crabs if you want to. But checkpoints are the big thing here, and I'm gonna showcase like what that looks like when we go downstairs. So next we're gonna pull Swampface, of course. Now at this point you shouldn't have Lust up yet. It should come up during the boss fight if you're on like a fine pace, and if that's the case, then feel free to send Lust on cooldown so you get another use of it on Giesel. But if not, it's not a big deal. You can just Lust a different pack down here. So heading downstairs, we are going to be doing a fairly large pull. We're going to be grabbing the soldiers on the bridge. We're going to be grabbing the inspector, electrician, and double contractor here. And then we're going to be attempting to grab the fire electrician. Now, as a prop paladin, obviously, I'm able to just chuck a shield, or DKs can death grip, but other tanks might have a harder time getting this mob into the group. If you need to slow roll it, you definitely can. Just focus the electrician. Once the first one dies, chain it into the bridge. It's just really important that you do not pull this Jumpstarter. This will obviously cause havoc. It will add a lot of damage to the tank, to the group, and cause a lot more movement. So this pull, I recommend pulling it back to the bridge where bubbles used to be. And this will put us at 86.6%. So following that, we're going to be heading into the next area. We're going to actually drag all of these mobs over to the Jumpstarter. Just make sure you're focusing or kicking the electricians. This will put us at 95.3. And then finally, we can actually pull these Jumpstarters, putting us at just over 100% counts, 100.43 to be exact. And so the biggest thing here is what I like to consider checkpoints. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but basically remembering that you need 78%, 78.7 before going down. And so what that means is, like, let's say someone body pulls extra crabs over here, or you accidentally like pull these loader bots or snipers or whatever it might be. When that happens, when you get to this point, let's say you're at, I don't know, I'm trying to like think of an example. Let's say you accidentally grab these loader bots here. Now when you pull one set of divers, you're actually going to be at 77.6. And so then you could be like, okay, well, I need 78.7, only 1% more. It's not worth pulling these divers, so let me just pull in 2 extra crabs. And that will actually doing this might end up being better for your group. So what I like to do is think about this dungeon as just checkpoint based, where once you get to Swampface, you need 78.5, give or take, %. And if you have that, great. If you don't have it, pull some extra crabs or some divers near the boss. Anyways, I hope that makes sense. This is definitely one of the more challenging dungeons for tank routing, I would say, just because of how open it is. Unlike something like Priory, which is open, it's also extremely linear after the first boss. So basically, similar to Priory, you have a checkpoint you want to hit by the time you get to a specific boss. And in the case of Priory, it's the first boss. And then after that, it's linear. Where in this dungeon, everything's very open. And so it's a little bit harder to find that checkpoint. So Swampface, wherever the dungeon becomes linear, that's where you want to make that mental note where it's like, okay, I need this percentage before proceeding. And so, yeah, you'll finish up with Giesel and you're going to be all set. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that helps. This route, as well as all my other routes in previous videos, will be located in a playlist and a Google Doc down below. Feel free to check it out if you have any questions. And of course, best of luck. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.